As former Dallas police officer Amber Guyger was sentenced to 10 years in prison for murdering her neighbor, Botham Jean, she found compassion from an unlikely source, Jean's brother. Jean gave Guyger a hug and said he knows Botham would have wanted her to devote her life to Christ. Our guest, Errin Haines, wrote about that moment for the Associated Press. She says many Black Americans resent the coverage of that moment because it runs the risk of papering over a legacy of racial violence. Errin Haines joins us now from Philadelphia. She's a national writer on race and ethnicity for the AP. Errin, so great to have you.
Thanks, Vlad. Nice to be with you today.
So explain to our viewers what you mean when you wrote in your piece that this was a, quote, rush to forget racial violence.
Sure. So while Jean's gesture to forgive Amber Guyger was certainly something that was a personal choice for him, there was a concern among many Black Americans who felt that this was a familiar scene where, a Black family member who has lost a loved one forgives, and that turns into kind of a broader conversation about public forgiveness that is really not so much focused on healing, but really just about moving on and not really acknowledging the larger problem of police violence in communities of color that has been, making our national headlines for the past several years.
Yeah, one of the things that I saw posted on social media, and there are other pieces written about this, is whilst, as you point out, it was a personal decision for him to reach out to Amber Guyger, the question was asked, how often do you see, for example, families of white victims reaching out, embracing the Black perpetrator of a horrific crime, or even someone who's been wrongly accused, as it happens in some cases?
Right. And I think that really was also a large part of the conversation that I was seeing too, and hearing from folks that I spoke with. You just don't really see the same expectation or call for kind of that grace and compassion that you see a lot of times from these Black family members. You don't see that same call to white Americans who have experienced, violence or who have lost a loved one. And really also just the issue that Black anger or rage is not something that is seen as justified or really acknowledged. There are calls for calm from, that are issued to the Black community in these kind of tense times. I know certainly awaiting the Guyger verdict, there was a call in Dallas, for people to remain calm and not be violent, even though, the community was really reacting to what they felt was violence that had been done to them.
Right. And, as we were discussing that, I mean, it's good to point out that we may not have ever seen something like that on camera. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen, that somebody has embraced somebody who's African-American who's perpetrated a crime. But I think the notes that I was getting on social media more had to do with the coverage. The coverage has been sort of outsized in this one particular moment. And on the flip side, why do you think there were so many people that were quick to call this, as you put it, an act of amazing grace and redemption?
Well, I think for a lot of people, it was reminiscent of the what happened in the wake of the Charleston 9 shooting, where you had a lot of family members there immediately expressing forgiveness for Dylan Roof, the shooter in that case. And I actually spoke to a woman who was the daughter of one of the victims of the Charleston 9, Reverend Shannon Risher. And what she had to say was that, her sister was I think the first person that forgave Dylan Roof, but she actually took about 2 years to come to that decision on her own, and really just kind of reiterated the notion that forgiveness is a personal choice for a lot of these folks. It is, as it was in Jean's case, I believe, a matter of faith that motivated that gesture, but certainly. Taking that individual choice and broadening it out to make it about, more of what the larger Black community should do or in these situations is something that people took issue with.
You also write in your article about how this isn't the first time we've seen this kind of expression of forgiveness. You pointed out Dylan Roof. Tell us a little bit more about that. Explain to the audience what you mean about the idea, the notion behind something perpetrated against one group of people and generally the victim having to be the one to open up or to find forgiveness in their hearts to the perpetrators.
Yeah, I think especially in the Black Lives Matter era, you have seen even as you have grieving parents or other family members grieving the loss of their loved one, them having to, be at the press conference, urge calm, even if they're not expressing forgiveness, just trying to tamp down any feelings of Black anger. That's something that has been kind of a recurring theme. But I mean, just historically, when white America has done an act of violence against a Black person, you see examples where, the response is, well, are you angry with me? Or are you, what is going to be the reaction from the Black community as a result of this violence that was done to them?
Does it serve as absolvement for in some instances for people to feel as if they've been forgiven for something that they may have perpetrated?
Well, I'm not sure about that, Vlad, but I will say that the the conversation around absolution, what a lot of the people that I spoke to for this story were saying was that, what that really does is it takes the focus off of the actual victim. And like I said, the conversation that we're having about the killing of unarmed Black people by police, and really puts it back on the perpetrator. I mean, Amber Guyger was convicted of murder, and it did not feel necessarily like that when as this gesture was unfolding, first by the brother, but then also by the judge in the case, who embraced her as well and gave her a Bible.
And you also pointed this out, that in fact, Botham Jean specifically cited his Christian faith during his statement. How does that play into this, the idea of forgiveness, redemption, absolvement?
Well, certainly, in Christianity, forgiveness is a central tenet of the faith, but especially for the Black church historically, race and faith have a unique relationship, even going back to slavery. And so the notion of forgiveness does play out a little differently in the Black church. Certainly, some of the folks that I interviewed, cited that relationship, that historical relationship, and kind of how we see that playing out in instances like these.
Errin Haines, really interesting article, and it's a conversation that a lot of people have been having, and I'm glad that you were here to shed some light on it from your perspective. We really appreciate it.
Vlad, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.